Hey there, Braves fans. Welcome to another episode of State of the Braves. I'm your host, George McNair. Really good to be back with you guys once again. Yes, we are still in January. Yes, it is still cold outside. And yes, it is still several weeks until spring training begins. And yet, there are some news notes to talk about this week on State of the Braves. Several things going down with the Braves organizations to discuss. So, among those items we're going to talk about today, Braves head scout Dana Brown is hired by the Astros as their new general manager. The Braves, we haven't talked about it. It's actually been a couple weeks now, but the Braves were finally able to participate in the international signing period. So we'll talk about a few players of note that we might want to look for in the future. These guys are always a ways away from the big leagues, 16, 17 years old when they sign, but nonetheless, we'll talk about them a little bit. Brian Snicker signs an extension through the 2025 season, so Snit is staying around for a while, and that's not shocking for sure. The Hall of Fame class of 2023 was announced for Major League Baseball. We'll get into that. Unfortunately, Braves fans kind of disappointed, though not shocked by no former Braves getting in this year, though a couple of them were pretty close. And then Spencer Strider during Fan Fest for the Braves pays tribute to the movie Major League. So we'll talk about that a little bit. It's kind of fun news. And just another reason to kind of like Spencer Strider. So, all right, well, let's start off with the Dana Brown news. So Dana Brown has been with the Braves for the last 4 seasons, hired by Alex Anthopoulos. And in fact, these two go way back. So Dana Brown was an exec with the Montreal Expos way back in the day, and this is when Alex Anthopoulos got his very first job in Major League Baseball. Dana Brown hired him. So these guys have been connected to one another for a large portion of their careers in Major League Baseball. Anthopoulos hiring Brown 4 years ago to run the Braves, basically run the Braves scouting department. And so a lot of what the Braves have done, especially in the draft, over the last 4 years can be directly tied to Brown. Of course, Anthopoulos gets a lot of the credit, but he's not, and he'd probably tell you, he's not the guy that's on the ground. He's trusting these guys, and particularly, I'm sure he trusted Dana Brown a lot because of their past together. So, yeah, 2019 through the 2022 draft has Dana Brown's fingerprints all over it. He will certainly be missed by the Braves front office. He's, obviously the Astros are also believing in him and his abilities, and he's never had this opportunity. He's been in baseball for a long time, so it's pretty cool for him to have an opportunity, not just to be a general manager, but to be a general manager of a very, very good organization in the Astros. It'll be interesting to see what he does there. Just looking back a little bit on his legacy in Atlanta, even though he wasn't in Atlanta all that long, let's look at some of the previous drafts and maybe some of the better draft picks that he took. So his first draft with the Braves, 2019, the first round pick that year was Shea Langoliers. Of course, the Braves end up eventually trading Langoliers to the A's in the Matt Olson deal. So Langoliers never really sees time in a Braves uniform, and yet has a big part to play in what the Braves look like today. The third round pick that year in 2019 was a guy you might have heard of. Michael Harris was the third round pick that year. And then all the way down into the 11th round, Vaughn Grissom is taken in the 11th round of the 2019 draft. And so those three obviously are of note, Harris particularly. And so Harris very recently accepted his Rookie of the Year award. And in that speech, not only was Brown in attendance, but he personally thanked Dana Brown for believing in him, for fighting for him. And there's been quite a few stories, and even Anthopoulos told a story of Dana Brown would always be in his ear, like, when are you going to bring up Michael Harris? When are you going to bring him up? He's ready. And eventually, of course, it happened. So I think probably more than any other player on the Braves team, Michael Harris is tied to Dana Brown, and we can thank him for that one. In 2020, this was the shortened draft. There was only 5 rounds in the 2020 MLB draft. The Braves took Spencer Strider in the 4th round, and and then Bryce Elder in the 5th round. So as far as Braves that we've seen and have made an impact, the last 2 rounds of the 2020 MLB draft were pretty good to the Braves. They also took Jared Schuster in the 1st round, and we have yet to see Schuster, but he could be knocking on the door this year. So we might see him in 2023. But for being such a short draft, getting 2 or 3 guys who could, play a part in your pitching staff is pretty awesome. And of course, Strider stands out above the rest. If he is able to back up what he did last year, he could be one of the best pitchers in baseball this season. In 2021, this draft is probably the biggest question mark of the 4 years that Brown oversaw a lot of the scouting. So Ryan Cusick was the 1st round pick that year. He has also been traded away since. 2nd round pick was Spencer Schwellenbach, who immediately got hurt, and we've yet to see him. Now, he could turn into a really good prospect, but we just haven't seen him much. 3rd round pick Dylan Dodd had a really slow start last year and then came on really strong in the second half of the season, so a lot of people do like Dodd a lot. And then 7th round pick is A.J. Smith-Shawver. He has been kind of highlighted as maybe the top prospect in the Braves system now. A lot of people like Shawver, but he's also had some injury stuff, and so we'll just have to see on him. So 2021, those last 3 that I mentioned, Schwellenbach, Dodd, and Shawver, could all turn out to be something, or they could flame out. We just haven't seen them very much, so it's hard to make a call on 2021 just yet. The 2022 season, for Dana Brown, his last draft for the Braves, Owen Murphy was the Braves' first pick, and then they got a comp pick, which was J.R. Ritchie. So basically two first-round picks. 2nd round pick was Cole Phillips. All these guys pitchers, potentially very good, but they're ways away. These are young guys, and we're going to have to see how they work out. The 5th round pick could end up being a real steal for the Braves. Nacho Alvarez, 3rd baseman. A lot of good things have been said about him early on. He came out of nowhere. No one was kind of had them on their radar, and the Braves knew something. And I don't know if Brown was directly tied to that or not, but Alvarez is certainly a guy that's interesting, a lot of mystery to him, and see how he plays in this upcoming minor league season. And then the 7th round pick, Adam Mayer, could also end up being a pretty interesting pickup out of the University of Oregon. Hasn't pitched much because of also a lot of injuries, but a lefty with definitely some talent. So this is Dana Brown. His 4 years is going to be really tied mostly to the draft, because through most of his time with the Braves were not able to play much of a part in the international signing period. The Braves picking one big signing last season, and then they had a full round of it this season. So, the 2022 signing period, which we're going to get into some of those guys here shortly, could have some diamonds in the rough for sure. See if Brown maybe found some interesting guys there. Of course, I'm sure, was also relying on guys that were working under him. So it's not just about Brown. I mean, he would say that, and certainly Alex Anthopoulos would say it too. It's a team of scouts, but he's kind of the primary guy, and he's the guy that probably Alex Anthopoulos trusted more than anybody. So losing a guy that you trust that much, I'm sure it's going to hurt the organization. But I think the Braves also have a lot of quality people in their scouting department. So it will be interesting to see if the Braves hire from outside or if someone rises through the ranks. It has been reported that the Braves don't intend to fill Brown's position this season, because it's kind of late in the period for anyone to be available that they might want to hire. So they're going to let things play out this season and then go from there. Of course, that's kind of interesting because at the very least, the MLB draft will be happening this season without a scouting director in place. So we'll obviously see how that goes. But of course, best wishes to Brown. I think he has a great opportunity, but a lot of pressure going into that kind of position with a very good organization. All right, guys. Well, let's move on from that and into the international signing period that the Braves just finalized a couple weeks ago. Again, Brown would have been very much on top of that stuff. He probably said, "Hey, Astros, let's talk, but I have to get this done for the Braves first. So he certainly did that. So, all right, well, again, this is the first signing period that the Braves have been able to fully participate in since all of those sanctions came down with the John Coppolella, stuff that happened. Of course, we talked about Coppy being reinstated not too long ago, so it's kind of interesting the timing of that. But nonetheless, the Braves are able to fully go at it this time around. And their big signing this year was Luis Guanipa. He's out of Venezuela. They signed him for $2.5 million. That's about half of what the Braves had to spend total for their international signings. If you don't know about Major League Baseball and how they deal with international players versus American players, you have American players go through the MLB draft and rounds kind of similar to what other the NBA and NHL and all that do, other sports leagues. But international players go through a totally different process, and it's honestly kind of an awkward process. A lot of these teams will begin relationships, make connections with agents of 13, 14-year-old kids from these impoverished countries. And then you just kind of see how that kid progresses over the next 2 or 3 years. They end up signing at 16, 17 years old. And you can see how Coppolella and other GMs would fall into some potential for some nefarious activity in that sort of situation. But nonetheless, that is the system that is in place right now. And again, the Braves are able to connect with Guanipa. He is an outfield prospect, an all-around prospect. You will see that some scouting organizations would have him in the 30s, the top 30 of international prospects, and others had him near the top 10. And a lot of that has to do with his size. He was initially listed about 5'9", so kind of undersized outfielder, but with very good bat speed, good bat-to-ball skills, really good defender. Then other publications, he must have grown. Again, young kid. So maybe he's more like 5'11" now. And that, of course, projects him to possibly have a little more power and that sort of thing. So nonetheless, I'm sure the Braves are very happy to sign Guanipa, but very young kid. I mean, it'll be a long, long time until, it's even possible that he sniffs the major leagues. And a lot of these guys flame out. When you're talking about young kids like this, projecting how a kid is going to, physically mature is really, really difficult. Everybody matures differently at different times. He could have matured early, and this is as big and strong as maybe he ever gets, or he could have a lot of growth still to do. Obviously no one knows that. And, also this transition from Venezuela to American baseball is very difficult, and some guys just have a really, really hard time adjusting to the culture and the language and all that stuff. So I certainly hope that Luis is able to do that, and that he has a good experience in the Braves organization. All right, so he's not the only guy that was signed. The Braves had quite a few players sign around, between $400,000 and $100,000, somewhere in that range. The other most expensive prospect that the Braves signed was Carlos Monteverde. He's also out of Venezuela. They signed him for $700,000. I hear that he's more of like a left field prospect, not particularly great defensively, but a lot of potential, especially power potential from that outfield position. John Estevez from the Dominican Republic signed for $310,000. Big, powerful right fielder. And again, he can play a true right field, big arm, but his power potential is the biggest thing for him. The Braves signed 3 shortstops for fairly big money. Carlos Cordero, John Gill, and Mario Baez all signed at the shortstop position. The Braves had 21 total signees. So again, just evidence that they were fully participating in this signing period. Last year, the Braves only signed 1 player, and it's because they had it was the first year that they were able to participate in international signing, and they were only given half the amount. As usual, they decided to spend all that pool money on 1 player, go big with 1 guy. That guy was Ambroise Tavares. He is in the Braves organization, but played very little last season. He had thoracic outlet syndrome surgery on his non-throwing arm, so probably nothing to be worried about, but he basically was shut down for the year. This guy is a shortstop, but he's kind of known as an offensive first shortstop, but has really big time offensive potential, kind of projects more as a third baseman. So anyways, just for Braves fans, it's really exciting to be able to dream big on these international prospects. It is very much a crapshoot when you're talking about such young kids. And yet, we know from Ozzie Albies to William Contreras to, of course, Ronald Acuna, that these guys, oftentimes the guys that aren't the highest paid guys coming out of these countries, some of them definitely turn into big time players, star players. So you hope that maybe one or two of these guys are that for the Braves. And of course, it will be a long time until we know much about them. But probably in 2 to 3 years, you'll start seeing them in the minors and really seeing what they're capable of doing. So that will be exciting to see. All right, guys, let's go ahead and move on to our next topic, and that is Brian Snicker signing an extension through the 2025 season. So, Snicker has really won me over the years. He will still cause me frustrations. I think Snicker is not the best in-game manager in the game by any means. That's not to say he never gets it right. I think he had a terrific run of decision-making in the Braves World Series year. But yeah, I mean, he makes some interesting decisions, to say the least. And yet one thing that about Brian Snitker is he's maybe the best players manager in baseball. His players love him. His players respect him. They go out and play hard for him. And he is able to bring the clubhouse together. We don't get to see all the ins and outs of how he does that. But it's certainly true that all the players love and respect him. And so that goes a long way. For sure, especially in Atlanta Braves clubhouse. So I think Snicker staying around, it's not surprising to anyone. I mean, it would be actually shocking if he left. Snicker, everybody knows his story, but basically in the Braves organization for 40 years until he gets his shot, finally gets his shot to be manager, wins the World Series, all this good stuff. And, so really the question is just how long will Snicker want to continue to manage? And I imagine he wants to do it as long as he's able, comfortably. Snicker is, like I said, he's older. He's 67 years old now. And so, this extension would take him basically through his age 69 to 70 season. Would he want to manage beyond that? Well, he probably doesn't know at this point, but it is kind of interesting to think about. I would assume the Braves would want him to stay kind of through the core of, this team. We all know that some of these great players for the Braves have signed extensions and are going to stay around for a while. And the core of this team is going to be together. So why wouldn't you want Brian Snicker to be there to lead them as well? I think you certainly would want that. So, if that's the case, let's just say, we've talked about the Braves extensions. The overall core is together through about 2027, some of them much longer than that. But if you look at Snicker maybe being with the Braves through 2027, he'd be 72 years old at the end of that. Now, the oldest manager in baseball right now is Dusty Baker at 73, and he's going into next season, he'll turn 74. So yes, guys can certainly manage well into their 70s. The task of managing in and of itself is, of course, not physically demanding, but a lot of travel and a lot of stress goes into, of course, the day-to-day grind that a major league manager has to endure. So who knows what Snicker's going to do? Hopefully his health is good and stays good enough for him to continue to do it. I hope that he does stick around for, at least while this core is together, because I think the Braves have a chance to have some really special seasons. And it got me thinking, okay, the Braves are going to, have teams that are able to not only win the division, but be World Series contenders year in, year out, probably for the next, 5+ seasons, for however long Brian Snicker is their manager. What if the Braves win 1 or 2 more World Series? Snicker, of course, waits so long to become a big league manager. I think he was about 60, 61 years old when he finally got his opportunity. Could it be possible that Brian Snitker could one day be a Hall of Fame manager? Now, you might think that's kind of absurd, but believe it or not, if Snicker manages 6 more seasons, maybe even 5 more seasons, then he would get to maybe 1,000 career wins. Now, that number in and of itself is not huge. Probably wouldn't get you into the Hall of Fame or anywhere close just with that. But there are managers in the Hall of Fame with about 1,200 wins and 1 World Series. So he is certainly within that mark. If he were to win 1 or 2 more World Series, he's almost a sure thing to be a Hall of Fame manager. Every manager who's won 3 World Series is in the Hall of Fame, except for Bruce Bochy, who of course will eventually be in the Hall of Fame as well. So it's just interesting to think about Brian Snitker, who waited so long to get his opportunity. It's within reason, particularly if he gets 1 or 2 more World Series, for him to one day be in the Hall of Fame. So pretty cool stuff there. All right, so speaking of the Hall of Fame, let's do a short little review of what went down as the Hall of Fame results came out for the 2023 class. The big news for Braves fans is there were several Braves in the running to get into the Hall of Fame this year. I wouldn't say they were favorites, but it was very interesting to see where they might fall in the voting. Unfortunately, former Braves Andrew Jones, Billy Wagner, and Gary Sheffield all fell short. For me, as far as where my heart is at, it's definitely with Andrew Jones more than any of these other guys. Gary Sheffield only played a couple seasons with the Braves. Is kind of a surly guy, not super likable. Would still be kind of cool to see him get in, but nonetheless, not really. Heart's not necessarily with him as much. Billy Wagner finished his career with the Braves. He had 1 terrific season, and you can say he finished on top with that season. But again, 1 year with the Braves, it would be cool for him to get in, and I think he probably will. But I don't really necessarily think of him as a Brave. I think of him as an Astro. But Andrew Jones, of course, spent most of his career, at least the first 10 seasons of his career, as a Brave, by far his best seasons as a Brave. And so definitely hoping that he can get in at some point. So nonetheless, none of these 3 guys are able to get in, though they got relatively close. Scott Rowland was elected into the Hall of Fame. He will be inducted along with Fred McGriff, former Brave. And of course, I talked about McGriff in some other episodes. One of my favorite Braves of all time. So I'll definitely be watching for that. Scott Rowland, as a Braves fan, I saw him play against the Braves more than anything. Of course, former Philly, former Cardinal, former Red, and he was a really good player. Rowland is one of those guys that you don't necessarily, when I heard the name, I was like, yeah, is he a Hall of Famer? You look at the numbers, it's like, yeah, I mean, he was consistently very, very good. And the Hall of Fame is certainly, full of guys who had consistent excellence and maybe weren't a top 5 player in the league at any one time, and yet they were really, really good for a long time. And that is Rowland. 8 Gold Gloves, was a well above average hitter basically his entire career, and finished it as a pretty solid player. Never really totally diminished as a player, especially defensively, but even offensively as well. So ultimately, several guys fall just short this year. Todd Helton came agonizingly close. He gets 72% of the vote. You have to get 75% to get in, but he will almost certainly get in next year. There's never been a player who's gotten that close and not gotten in, and he has, I think this was his 5th or 6th year on the ballot, so he has plenty of time. So look for Todd Helton to get in next year. Billy Wagner, many people also think he will be able to get in next year. Now, this was his 8th year on the ballot. He got to 68%. So more than likely he's going to get in next year, or possibly we'll get that final year bump and get in as well. Andrew Jones, like I said, the guy that most Braves fans are probably rooting for to get in, he got to 58%, which, he's still quite a ways away, but he's only in his 6th year of voting. He's got a lot of time left, and as long as he can continue to rise up the, probably not next year. He probably didn't get in next year, but I would I would expect and hope that Andrew Jones probably in year 8 could get into the Hall of Fame. Certainly hope that for him. I think Rolen's induction also helps Andrew Jones a little bit. Of course, they play totally different positions, but Rolen was a terrific defender, and I think over the years, more and more voters are appreciating elite defenders, and Andrew Jones is probably one of the top 3 or top 5 most elite defenders to ever play baseball. I don't think that is hyperbole. He might even be the greatest center fielder of all time. Some people are going to argue between him and Willie Mays probably, but that's about it. And so, you know, it's true that Scott Rolen was probably the better offensive player for his career, but Jones actually has a better peak. That's one way that some Hall of Fame voters look at players, who has that great 7-year peak to really show, was this guy, next level good at some point in his career. And Andrew Jones was better than Rolen there. He was right in line with Todd Helton, and pretty much every other guy that was on the ballot this year, Jones was better than. So, of course, his biggest negative is that Andrew didn't have the long sustained career like many Hall of Famers do. He had a really quick drop off in his early 30s and was never really able to regain that form. But nonetheless, he had pretty much 10 years of Hall of Fame worthy play. So certainly hoping that Andrew Jones can get in, if not next year, in maybe 1 or 2 more years. All right, my final topic for today, guys, is kind of a fun one. Spencer Strider, he's increasingly becoming one of my favorite Braves. He had a fun bit of news during the Braves Fan Fest in Atlanta this past week. I'd already seen this news that he was changing his number to number 99, and I wasn't sure exactly why that was. And it came out today that he's doing it because of his love for the movie Major League and the character of Ricky Vaughn. So most baseball fans have seen that movie. It is a pretty classic 80s baseball movie. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should check it out at some point. But Strider is embracing his inner Ricky Vaughn and going to number 99. So that's just kind of a cool thing. I like when guys do that sort of thing. It just tells you a little bit more about Strider, his mentality. He's a fun dude, but he's also intense, and I think those two things combined show you why he is choosing that number. So just another reason to love Spencer Strider, and I'm definitely looking forward to him walking out to the mound with number 99 on, and maybe some Wild Thing playing. So that'll be fun to watch. But guys, that's a wrap for this episode of State of the Braves. We're going to continue to look to see if the Braves maybe add any other pieces before spring training, and if any other news comes out. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of State of the Braves, and I'll definitely talk to you guys soon.